What's up guys, Adam here with another video, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how you can make your own generator exhaust extension. But before I get into all of that, if you're new to the channel or just haven't gotten a chance to do so yet, please consider hitting that red subscribe button down below so you don't miss any of my new how-to and do-it-yourself videos that I make on a regular basis for around your house. And if you find the information in this video to be helpful to you, please let me know by giving it a thumbs up. Now I'm in the middle of a generator shed build, and I really needed to come up with a better and more effective way to get that generator exhaust out of that shed. And when I looked online to find any of the pre-made exhaust extensions, I couldn't find any that would match up to my generator, or actually any of the generators that I own. They're just those real generic ones. So that ultimately left me where it's probably leaving a lot of you of where we're going to have to make our own. And I didn't want to have to weld anything together, so I took quite a bit of time in trying to find some parts that I could put together in order to make this without having to do any form of welding. And I wanted to make it as simple as possible. So let's get right into the video and I go through all the steps and show you how simple it is just to make your own generator exhaust extension kit. So these are going to be all of our items that we're going to need in order to make this exhaust extension for the generator. Over here is a 1 inch by 18 inch long piece of galvanized steel piping, and on both ends it is threaded. This is a 1 inch floor flange, and we're going to trace out our shape that we're going to need in order to get it to fit to this particular generator. And you'll do the same with whatever shape that you need yours to be on your generator, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. This is a gasket maker. It's a form of silicone that is resistant for high temperatures, and this is going to go, once we get this cut down on our floor flange, it's going to go between the existing exhaust port on the generator and this base of the floor flange, so that none of that exhaust can escape out from between the floor flange and the existing exhaust port. And then over here are two items that I had thought about using, but I decided for this installation, for me, I didn't need it. But some of you may want to use it, and at the end of the video I'll show you how you can then use a couple steps just to put this on. This is a 18-inch piece of galvanized steel flex tubing, and this is the clamp that you would then use on top of the flex tubing to clamp it down to the piping that will be at the base of the exhaust extension. And like I said, I'll show you how to do that at the end of it. It might be something you're interested in doing, just because if you don't have support, and this is a fairly long piece of steel, so it's kind of heavy out at the end. If you don't have any support for it, which I will, but if you don't, you might be interested in then cutting this down and attaching this, because it's a lot lighter and it's a little bit flexible, so you can move it around a little bit. So let's get right into the instructions on how to make this generator exhaust extension. So the first thing we need to do is we need to pull out these bolts so that we can pull out this piece of metal here. And we're going to use this piece of metal on the bottom of the floor flange and trace it out so we can get that floor flange to match up to this piece as close as possible. And when I pull this out, it's going to pull out the spark arrestor with it as well, which that's okay. Once we start putting everything back together, the spark arrestor will go right back where it was before. So let's pull this out now. So now that we have the piece of metal with the spark arrestor attached to it that we removed from the generator exhaust port, what we're going to do is we're going to put this on this floor flange as center as we can with this hole, so that then we can take a marker and we'll trace around the outside of the metal so that we can get a template for where we need to cut this floor flange down to, so that we can get this metal, our end result, to match up to the outside of the metal that came off of the generator as close as possible. Alright, so now there's our template, and we need to cut it down to that shape, and it should match up pretty close to what we took off the generator. So now that we've got the floor flange in the vise, we can now start grinding it down into the shape that we traced out. When cutting metal, definitely make sure to have some form of eye protection, whether it be safety glasses, goggles, or a face shield. As we're grinding this down, and cutting it, we're going to have a lot of metal shavings that are going to be flying through the air, and probably the last thing you're going to want is a piece of metal stuck in your eye and having to go to the doctor to get it removed. It happens all the time, so definitely make sure that you're wearing some form of eye protection. Alright, so there is the base for our exhaust extension. And it's not going to win any beauty contest, I don't think, but I'm focused more on the functionality of it, and to me it looks like it should work really well. So let's move on to the next step, which is drilling our holes so that the bolts can attach through it. So before I start drilling these holes, a little tip would be use some form of a lubricant where you're going to be drilling your holes. This is going to reduce friction and heat buildup, which makes drilling a lot easier, and the bits will last longer. Alright, and so now we've got all of our holes drilled for the bolts to pass through. And here's our original piece of metal that with the spark arrestor attached to it that we took out of the generator exhaust. And all of the holes line up perfectly. So all the bolts, when it gets bolted back on, here will be our exhaust tube coming out. The bolts will go back through these holes and then through this side, and this will be mounted up against the generator. So looks like it's going to work well. So in this step we'll make our gasket, and the reason for the gasket is so once these two are put together, our base that we made out of the floor flange and the original piece of metal with the spark arrestor attached to it that we took out of the generator in the beginning, so that when those two are together, none of the exhaust fumes can escape from between the two of them. And I put a bunch of blue painter's tape around the whole perimeter of the original piece of metal so that once this gasket maker fully cures, it won't stick to the original piece of metal. It will only be stuck to the floor flange that we made into our base onto that metal. And I'll go around the whole perimeter of the blue painter's tape, and I'll put down a fairly liberal amount of the gasket maker. After I've put that down, I'll take our piece of metal, our base that we made out of the floor flange, and put that on top of the original piece of metal with the gasket maker in between. I'll take our bolts, put the bolts down through the holes, and then we'll tighten this down. It'll be fairly loose, it'll be finger tight, tighten it down into the generator where it's supposed to go for about an hour, and then after about an hour I'll tighten it down to torque specs, and it'll need an additional 24 hours to then cure out completely, and then we'll have our gasket made. Now you may have noticed that these are not the same bolts that were originally in the generator. I had to buy longer bolts to make up for the extra width of the floor flange. So it's been 24 hours now since we applied the gasket maker to the two pieces of metal. It's completely cured and our gasket is made. So the next step we can take is we can remove the two pieces of metal again from the exhaust, the original piece of metal with the spark arrestor and our base for our exhaust extension. And we can then separate the two from each other, and the gasket maker should only be attached now to our base for the exhaust extension. And then we can remove the blue painter's tape from the original piece of metal, and we can now go around the perimeter of our base and trim up any of the excess gasket maker that is cured on the outside. This is really just for aesthetic purposes. It'll make it look nicer, but what we really need to pay attention to is the interior part of the base for the exhaust extension, and really trim that back so that it's not limiting any of the exhaust that is being pushed through the muffler. So now that we've got, for the most part, all of our excess gasket maker cut away, you can see that there's really nowhere now for the exhaust to be able to escape from in between the two pieces of metal or through it in any way, even up around where the bolts come through. That's going to seal off well too, but for the most part we're more worried about the center area here. But it's completely encapsulated now, and none of that exhaust is going to be able to escape. So now that all of that is done, I can now show you how this is all going to go together. So first we're going to put our spark arrestor back in with that original piece of metal that we took out in the beginning. Then we'll take our base that we made with the gasket and we'll put that on top, and then we'll bolt it all down. Now that that is bolted down, we can take our 18-inch piece of 1-inch galvanized steel piping, put the threading into the base, and just spin it on. And this is where it ends for me. My generator exhaust extension is now complete, and I'll be able to get the exhaust completely out of my generator shed. Now at the beginning I told you about another option so that you can include this flex tube if you want, instead of a big long just straight piece of pipe. If you want it for, because it's lighter and it's a little bit more flexible, you can move it around a little bit. That is of course an option to you, and the way you would do this is I would just cut this steel off, and you can pick wherever you want it, whatever works for you. Just pick a point where you're going to cut it off. Once it's cut off, this flexible tube would go in on top, and then you would put a clamp then on top of the tube, and it's got the bolts and everything. You just tighten it all down. It would bring it down onto that piping pretty tight, but in order to definitely make sure that there is no exhaust coming out, you could just, at this point, once it's tightened down, you could take some of that gasket maker and just put it around inside of the edges here and let it set on there and cure, and then none of the exhaust would be able to escape. So that's just another option, just one extra added step to, if that's the way you would prefer it to be. That, of course, is an option as well. So pretty easy. All right, guys, so that's pretty much all there is to making your own generator exhaust extension kit. It's pretty simple. I showed you a couple extra steps that you can make in order to put a flex tube on it if that's how you choose to do it. I'm not going to put one on. I'm not too concerned about the weight of that pipe, as it's going to be supported by the wall in the generator shed. Once I get it cut out, I'm going to put some mounting brackets in it so that it doesn't have any play in it. So I'll post a video for my generator shed once I've got it built, and I'll put it up in the top right corner here once that's done. It should be done in a few weeks. And that being said, with all the generator projects I've done and ones that I've got coming and stuff that I'm doing around the house, if that's the kind of videos that you're looking for or you're into, then please consider hitting that red subscribe button down below. I put out a video every single week, and if you found the information in this video would be helpful to you, please also give it a thumbs up. And I hope to see you in the next video.